Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John George, and I'm a senior associate on the Flare team. We at Flare are a dedicated healthcare VC fund that focuses on investing in innovative healthcare companies in both software and tech-enabled services. Very excited to have you join us for our 13th quarterly expert roundtable focused on digital health's role in cancer care. In the last few decades, oncology has seen remarkable transformations from the early days of chemotherapy to today's precision medicine. The recent breakthroughs in cancer care have been accelerating. Today, our focus is on the next frontier of value-based cancer care and digital health's role in innovation. As folks know, the value-based approach emphasizes patient outcomes and cost efficiency, representing a significant shift from our traditional fee-for-service models. We're still in the early innings of value-based cancer care, but in the last decade alone, a number of promising advancements have been made that are providing patients, oncologists, and care team members with the tools needed to support this shift to value. And a study conducted by the Journal of Oncology Practice, recent data shows that value-based care models can reduce the cost of cancer by up to 34% while maintaining or improving care quality. The advent of digital health technologies, including AI, machine learning, are enabling more personalized and effective treatments. For instance, AI-driven diagnostic tools have shown to improve early cancer detection rates by 5 to 10%. On the therapeutic side, the landscape continues to rapidly evolve, and the market for pharmaceutical spend continues to grow. IQVIA reports that oncology remains the largest and fastest growing disease area of pharmaceutical spend globally, worth an estimated $188 billion in 2021, growing annually at 12.1%. These advancements, such as immunotherapies and gene therapy, come with their own set of challenges, however, particularly when we think about integrating them into our existing systems and ensuring equitable access to the treatment for these patients. As we look at recent investments on cancer services and platforms that are looking to disrupt the market, we've seen a number of recent fundings and national initiatives that are taking fold. And while it's still yet to be seen what the greatest opportunity and where that greatest opportunity lies to disrupt the traditional business models in cancer care, startups and organizations continue and attempt to enter different aspects and parts of the cancer care continuum. And so opportunities exist across the continuum here and across different segments, but these segments are also fraught with challenges related to regulatory changes, payment models, and changes and challenges related to staffing. Service-based models in particular and do require strong coordination around other aspects of care, and not just the clinical aspects, but the patient journey and aspects such as the patient's financial burden, education of the treatment, and family and caregiver support as well. So far, we've seen a prominent activity across diagnostic category, treatment coordination and navigation, and the risk enablement category that you see below. With that, excited to be joined by a group of senior operating executives, many of which are incredible partners and LPs in the fund at Flare, as well as seasoned entrepreneurs who will share their perspectives on digital health's role in oncology. As you see here, our panelists include Suneet Varma, Global Oncology and U.S. President at Pfizer. Pfizer is also an LP in our fund at Flare. Dr. Michael Sherman, venture partner at RA Capital and former chief medical officer at Point 32 Health, formerly known as Harvard Pilgrims. Dr. Razu Shrestha, Chief Innovation and Commercialization Officer at Advocate Health. Razu also serves on the steering committee of the Biden administration's Cancer X initiative, and Advocate Health is also an LP in our fund. Adam Pellegrini, co-founder and CEO of Jasper Health. Adam's background includes time as a former executive at Walgreens, CVS, Microsoft, and Fitbit. Rick Dean, CEO of OncoHealth. Rick is a former executive at Humedica, Optum, and also helped co-found Optum Ventures. Hill Moss, co-founder and CEO of VivorCare, a Flare portfolio company, is doing important work in the cancer survivorship community. Alice Papanio, managing director at BrightEdge, the impact investing arm of the American Cancer Society. And lastly, Melissa Tucker, director of product and head of research at Verily, overseeing the oncology research there. We'll host 3 discussions over the next hour. First, a fireside chat with Suneet Varma, facilitated by my partner, Michael Greeley. Second, my partner, Dan Gebremedhin, will dig in with Razu and Michael Sherman on how payers and providers are thinking about this shift to value. And third, a 2-part discussion moderated by myself and Ian Chiang, focused on the white spaces that startups are tackling in both care management and life sciences. And so with that, thrilled to invite my partner, Michael Greeley, to the stage for a conversation with Suneet Varma at Pfizer. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, JG. As we wait for my friend Suneet to join us. Suneet, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. We're honored to have you, especially in this leadoff position to help set the stage. You sit at an incredibly important turnstile of this sector, this segment of the healthcare industry. Maybe by way of introduction, introduce yourself a little bit more, and then talk a little bit about Pfizer's initiatives in this oncology sector.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. And I'm happy to be here. I would say that at Pfizer, in my role as global president of our oncology space, is one of the 2, let's say, marquee therapeutic areas that we're focused on between now and 2030 and beyond. The other being the ever famous vaccines of Pfizer, which gained a lot of notoriety during the pandemic. But I've been in this role for a couple of years. I was president and general manager of our rare disease business, including our gene therapies before. So, Michael, I'm really in that specialty space of Pfizer, although prior to that, I also ran our off-patent medicines business and our hospital unit as well. I'm 14 years at Pfizer and 14 years at Wyeth before that. So 28 years service record with different companies along the way. What I would say is that in my, let's say, most recent period of my career, where we're really focused on the super specialty areas of oncology and rare disease, I would say that we've really moved into a space which is what I call high impact, high value spaces. These are not 1 penny tablets. These are $1 million treatments per patient or 6 figures per year. And that's because the high impact and high value nature of what we're doing in the most, let's say, pioneering science is leading to some of the biggest breakthroughs that we're seeing in the space. In fact, I would argue that in the last 5, 10, 15 years, there's been a renaissance in cell therapy and in gene therapy. And so I'm really happy to be in a leadership role at Pfizer to shepherd us towards that next era of breakthroughs.
And maybe, Sunit, more specifically, what are some of the most urgent, important things you're working on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I think a couple things come to mind. First is bringing that latest advancement in the scientific space, okay? Complex biologics, CAR T, bispecific antibodies, and complex biologics like antibody drug conjugates. I'll just put that out there because this morning we were pleased to announce publicly, and I can't help but mention this, Michael. I thought I might not be able to make it, but we announced that we received the FTC clearance to move forward with our acquisition of Seattle Genetics, or Seagen. And so obviously moving our pioneering science forward in the therapeutic area to essentially have a multimodal treatment approach is critically important. But I would argue that, Michael, in this space, we're really a research and development driven organization, and our ability to drive new clinical studies forward with pace and intensity is equally important, because otherwise without that we can't deliver the breakthroughs. And I would say in oncology, frequently things leapfrog and accelerate. It's not just phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in a linear way. Everything's in parallel, at risk, and therefore you can go from phase 2 to market. You can go phase 3 to market. You can, and you may not know this, maybe the audience knows this, 50 to 60% of all the accelerated approvals that have been received in the United States have been in the oncology space in the last 2 decades. The need for speed is, let's say, an underpinning of those pioneering breakthroughs.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that in a moment, because Pfizer is an important partner, customer of a few of our portfolio companies like Aetion in the real world evidence space and Health Verity. And I know you've been at the forefront of those relationships. But help me reconcile. JG presented a timeline that showed dramatic acceleration. You're alluding to some acceleration. He also shared that the overall cost reduction has been, I think he said, 34%. So in a world of these very expensive therapies, how do you think about cost in that modality where the treatments have become so expensive, yet the overall cost of care seems to be coming down? Pretty
correct. Well, yeah, I would say that overall we do see the natural cycle of innovative and then loss of exclusivity, and they're going to have sort of natural ebbs and flows in the economics of the space. But I would argue also that similarly, as we move into these new scientific breakthrough areas, that they are highly effective, highly efficacious, and so in some cases curative. And so what happens is that the total cost of care is, and when you look at the life cycle of the treatment of the patient, can be better. Therefore, there can be savings. And I think about cell therapy or even gene therapy in the rare disease. I don't want to say a one and done, but there could be a high premium for the cost of that treatment, but then there could be a curative effect for many years, which essentially overall favor the economics of the healthcare system.
Yeah, and we have several hundred participants on this webinar. Most of them are from the digital health technology sector. Comment on how you think about partnering with those types of companies, how Pfizer's engaging with that type of technologies to drive your initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting space because, Michael, we're applying our approach to how we look for science to how we look for digital advancements. And that is, we take an open source approach to innovation. We are not the people to develop the next digital solution, the next wearable, sometimes not even the next complex biologic. So we essentially have that open source models that led us to what I call build, buy, partner. There are some things that we're going to build ourselves for sure, and that will be in our pipeline and in digital technologies. But there's some things that we're going to buy and some things we're going to partner and collaborate across the space. So we want to bring the best of the outside in. And essentially, I used to say it's a third between build, buy, partner. I think it's really the way to look at it should be at least half external in terms of sourcing that opportunity. And so the way we're bringing that to life in Pfizer is and I'm going to highlight just two, I'm going to oversimplify it, but we have Pfizer Ventures and we have Pfizer Ignite. Pfizer Ventures is very common in the industry. Many companies have this where we say we're going to put small equity investments in firms that we think have an opportunity to advance a technology that's either going to be directly in the treatment space or an adjacency, which is going to enable patients along their journey to have a better outcome. And that's something we've had for a number of years, and that's quite successful. Pfizer Ignite, on the other hand, is something a little bit different. And that is that where we essentially offer ourselves to all high potential opportunities, therapeutically or digitally or otherwise, that we think we can add tremendous value to as a strategic partner and advisor. And what I mean by that is where we can bring human capital to bear, where we can bring knowledge capital to bear, and also financial capital to bear. So for example, if a company says, we want you to run a clinical trial, and we've got this great technology, but we can't fund it ourselves, we can raise the money, or Pfizer can donate or contribute in kind and become a partner of sorts. We do the same thing on digital technologies as well. So Pfizer Ventures, typical seed approach, single-digit millions, let's say, for a small venture. Pfizer Ignite, double-digit millions, if not triple-digit millions, if we had to.
So let me ask you a similar question with a different slant. If I had your 3-year plan, what would be some of the most urgent initiatives that you're out in the market looking for technology solutions to help address?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that one of them would be in the clinical trial space, and specifically how we can accelerate our ability to, let's say, deliver the quality of the clinical trial that we need, but at the same time, making sure we're operating with a light speed mentality. We have seen that between, again, almost 60% of our site visits are now done remotely. It used to be only about 10% if you went back about 10 years ago. So our ability to use technologies, and in fact, monitor patients remotely and essentially reduce the burden of participating in clinical trial. Just Pfizer has today, beyond oncology, 50,000 people in clinical trials. Okay, that's just Pfizer. Okay, now if you add 10 other companies, then it's 500,000. And you think about all the time and energy put in a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year product life cycle or development cycle. One of the biggest parts of that is how are you going to manage the patients, and of course the recruitment that precedes it, and how can you identify those patients, how can you put them in clinical trials, and then how you can accelerate the using technologies, the monitoring, the site visits, all the burdens that come with it that allow us to bring those breakthroughs to patients sooner. So we get the high impact that we need. There's huge value to Pfizer, to patients and the ecosystem, but also to our partners in the space.
Yeah, and just in the last 2 minutes that we have, and this is an unfair question because it could be an hour-long conversation, but in the world of Pfizer, what does value-based care look like?
Yeah, I think that value-based care is a very interesting area because obviously we're looking at outcomes and thinking what the value is, et cetera. We are looking at innovative payment models, and we are always out there offering value-based opportunities, value-based contracting, things like that. Some payers are more interested than others, and so we see as a mix of receptivity to it. But when it comes to innovative payment models, which are even broader than value-based, we're all in. And for example, we've offered warranty plans on products like Xalkori, which is a lung cancer medicine, that if a patient discontinues to a side effect, we'll warranty the out-of-pocket that they had. We're looking at fintech or microfinancing that with out-of-pocket copays being capped on the Inflation Reduction Act next year. Let's say today it's not capped, you pay $8,000 to $10,000. Next year it's $3,000. The year after that it's $2,000. How can you amortize the payments across? And Michael, we can amortize the cost of a fur coat, but we can't amortize the cost of our healthcare, which I think anybody would rather have much more. So those are the kinds of innovative payment models that we're looking at. And some of those are, let's say, agnostic to the payer. Value-based is with the payer in mind, and specifically are very important when it comes to cell therapy, like CAR T and gene therapy, where the upfront is so high that there has to be some performance-based metric to that. And we're seeing that in the US and ex-US as well.
And notwithstanding that, is there a future where Pfizer has a much more direct patient relationship? Is there innovation around the model itself that you're preparing for, or you envision 5-10 years forward?
Absolutely there is. And I would say that one of the areas we look at, let's just go upstream and downstream. Upstream, we would love to, and we have been looking, and you mentioned some companies in your intro, look for how we could better and more quickly recruit appropriate patients. Patient finding is super hard. And it's one of the longest cycles. Let's say it takes 3 years on average for us to recruit a trial. What if that were 2 years? What if it were 1 year? Our chairman said, what if you could do it in 3 months instead of 3 years? And so that gives you a sense of the order of magnitude leap forward and the value that could happen on the upstream part. Now, downstream, I think there's also tremendous value to what we could do in terms of technology, et cetera, et cetera. And I will say patient finding, diagnosis, treatment, et cetera, using AI and machine learning algorithms is also something that we're looking at to accelerate the uptake of products once they're in the market. And just a small example, we can crawl through medical records with the consent of a healthcare system and identify factors longitudinally for a patient that were otherwise undiscernible to the human being and bring them in for treatment and diagnosis definitively earlier, faster, and to the benefit of the patient.
Yeah, that's terrific. Any other thoughts around the oncology initiatives that you're launching that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that in general, I think it was in the opening that John mentioned, it is the biggest therapeutic area in biopharma globally. It is growing double digits. I actually have a higher number for the future than was shown there for the marketplace. And overall, Pfizer, we see ourselves as a top 5 company for the next decade to come. I would just say one more thing, Michael, which is you can think about 2030, 2031, 2032. I've got a 2042 P&L. So we are doing a 20-year plan for oncology. So I always say to people, and I had a colleague in my team recently, she just got married, she had a kid, she's a sales rep. She says, should I stay in oncology? I said, the future is bright. If you want to work for the next 20 years, you're in the right place.
I thought venture capital had long horizons. That's extraordinary. Hey, Suneet, thank you so much. I know you've had a very busy day today. We're glad to grab 20 minutes of your time. And we really are deeply grateful for the partnership with Pfizer and look forward to collaborating on future initiatives. With that, you and I will step away. We'll introduce my partner, Dan Gebremedhin, to take us through the next segment. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Janine. Really great conversation. Excited to welcome our next set of panelists to the stage. Both are great partners to us. Is actually on our industry advisory board. We first met Razu when you were the Chief Innovation Officer at UPMC, which is a Flair partner. And then we were thrilled when you transitioned to advocate in Atrium Health, where you're leading commercialization, innovation, transformation, and strategy. And then you're also happen to be on the steering committee of the Biden Task Force, Cancer X. Michael Sherman is a venture partner at RA Ventures, which is a co-investor with Flair at Somatis. But Michael, you had a 20-year career in payer organizations prior to your role at RA Ventures, first with United Humana, and then the last several years, probably about a decade at Harvard Pilgrim in Point 32, where you were chief medical officer, and then notably hired me as a medical director about a decade ago. And so I had a great opportunity to work with you there. So Michael, I might start with you. That 20-year career at payer organizations, what were your thoughts and what were your priorities when thinking about oncology care? Maybe were some of the limitations there?
Yeah, thank you for the warm introduction. And I've been on the venture side for 9 months, which is to say I'm still spending a lot of time apologizing for having been a payer. But the truth is, at least the way we did it, a lot of payers were focused too much on that upfront cost, looking just at the price tag. How do you say no? How do you keep the costs reasonable? And that's not why people buy insurance. They want confidence that they'll get the best treatment for their families, particularly for oncology care. So one of the things we did was to focus on innovation. How do you partner with companies, whether it is providers, whether it is diagnostics, whether it is pharma companies, to think about paying for value in ways that make it easier to say yes and de-risk it. And we can talk about some models later on, but that's always been our true north. And we've done work on the innovation side with all those different kind of companies. Oncology, one of the things I'm proud of is that we actually brought in OncoHealth, and I know that their CEO is speaking next. And their approach is less about saying no and more about how do you talk to the provider, the referring physician, and talk about what's right. And even the fact that a certain percent of the time it leads to a higher cost approach actually gives that credibility. But I'm also thrilled about, again, on the digital side, that we're one of their early partners with their digital care management platform, where they were reaching out and doing online care management for things that the docs were missing. And one of the pieces of secret sauce there, and there are other DM type programs for oncology, is that if they were doing the they actually knew who the patients were immediately and what the treatments were and what the some of the pitfalls were. And one of the challenges with many of the traditional disease management programs or other approaches is people get referred into late. I'm proud of the fact that we got to do it right, and I still a great team in place at Point 32, but I'm even more excited about the opportunities I have now to take what I've learned and work with innovative companies.
Yeah, no, that's great, Michael. I heard you communicate that disease management and utilization management is important. It's one of the kind of core functions of a payer. But how do you think about innovation, right? How do you think about whole person care strategies to not be making siloed coverage, non-coverage decisions? Rosso, I might transition over to you. You now are at the center of a very large multi-site, multi-state health system and academic medical center. What are your priorities when you think about oncology care?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And I reflect the question that you're asking against even everything that Michael just mentioned here as well. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking here in front of you and this esteemed audience and participation today. When I think about my personal career as a radiologist trained in informatics and business and really looking at all of the things that I've been privy to in the last 25 plus years around innovation and strategy and health system transformation, and I parlay that against the question that you're asking, Dan, today here at Advocate Health, where we're now one of the third largest health systems in the country. We're at $30 billion annual revenue, 155,000 teammates across multiple states in the Southeast and the Midwest. And when I look at the growth scale and influence that we've been able to pull together, as well as the imperatives that we're seeing in front of us, in front of our very eyes, I think about the fact that we're now, end of 2023, it's been just a year since we came together. The FTC gave us the thumbs up for Atrium Health and Advocate Aurora Healthcare to come together as Advocate Health, headquartered out of Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I am. And I look at all of the headwinds and the tailwinds that are in front of us, right? That in so many ways informs the specifics of our strategic priorities and the way that we're continuing to push on forward as Advocate Health. So competition today, just to name a few, Dan, looks very different than it did even, you guys went through some of this in the earlier part of our opening. The economic realities today are very different from how things were just even a couple of years ago. When you think about the steady march towards value-based healthcare and population health as a key driver of the economic realities, but also the discombobulation that really exists between provider organizations, payer organizations, and payment overall. Then you think about technology and the exponential leaps forward in technology. Just even in the last year or so, we just celebrated a year of ChatGPT actually being publicly available. And the capabilities that we have in our fingertips are nothing to be shy about. And then last but not least, the social imperatives on this side of the pandemic, having lived through the realities of the pandemic in the last 4 years, the social imperatives of the things that we really need to be focused in on as a not-for-profit health system, as a healthcare industry overall. These are specific things that really culminate in a sense of urgency that we have at Advocate Health in really saying, all right, how do we elevate clinical preeminence and safety, advance health equity? That's a big driver for Gene Woods, who's our CEO here, and Jim Scottsberg, the co-CEO. Improving affordability. I know we might talk about some of that in our dialogue today as well. That's a big pledge that we're making here at Advocate Health. And then building this next generation workforce as we think about oncology, as we think about artificial intelligence. What does upskilling and reskilling really look like? And how do we really train the next generation of oncologists and surgeons and residents and fellows and nurses, others? And then last but not least, accelerating learning and discovery. And then tied to that really, is environmental sustainability, which again, I know for Pfizer and for others as well, is a big driver of the strategic priorities. So when you think about even those specific elements of how we're continuing to rethink what growth, scale, and influence looks like, the big driver for us is to say, all right, how do we do this and really create measurable impact for the communities that we're part of? And then how do we partner to the conversation that we're having today with the right entities so that we can together get at these outcomes in a much faster way?
Yeah, no, a host of priorities that you guys are focused on, given that you guys are, as you mentioned, just important stewards in the community with a lot of different stakeholders and sometimes competing priorities around being a competitive provider in the market, whereas being very focused on health equity, safety. Really insightful. Michael, I might kick it back over to you. Certainly now as an investor, you're looking at new models of care, new forms of treatment. And then oftentimes we talk about cost of care, and we talk about value. And maybe put back your payer hat on. When you think about value in oncology care, how do you define that? How did you define that? How do payers navigate this conversation around defining value in oncology care?
So the answer is not very well. If we were talking about things other than oncology, it gets a little simpler in theory. For example, we just invested in an amazing company, Commons Clinic, that is doing bundled payments for musculoskeletal procedures. It's a very elegant approach. Give them a certain amount of money and let them deliver great outcomes and great patient responses, et cetera. And that's not that complicated compared to oncology. For oncology, first of all, payers are inordinately focused on the upfront cost. And again, as we frequently talk about, something can have a high upfront price tag, like many of the CAR Ts, but be good value over the long term, given what you're getting from them. What makes oncology also even more complex, a couple of factors. One is, again, how do you define and how do you measure? And it's not always clear. A lot of focus is on overall survival, progression-free survival, other metrics, which are agreed upon, but we get away from the fact that sometimes quality of life isn't what people would like. And there's more and more of a discussion at certain points about quality versus quantity of life. But as we've seen, people like Atul Gawande have written about how hard it is for physicians who are trained in offering care to have that hard discussion. So in many cases, we're paying for the wrong things, and just how long have you lived, it may be the wrong answer, a bit more complicated than that. But the other problem is we're extremely fragmented. We did value-based deals. We had an oncology medical home with what was then Commonwealth Hematology Oncology. I think you may have been there before they got bought by Dana-Farber. We try to do some bundled payments, but frankly, the current payment system is working well for many oncologists. We did some value-based agreements for drugs. We did an agreement with Takeda for Lundbrig, again, similar to what you heard earlier, tied to basically adherence. And the rationale for that is it's easy to measure if someone's filling the prescription. If they stop it, either it's not working or the side effects are really bad, and either way, it's not working. The challenge with that is because regulations in most states prevent payers from steering toward a certain class, let's say one checkpoint inhibitor, it limits the incentive of the pharma companies to do that sort of thing. And then on diagnostics, again, there's many examples where payers are very short-sighted. For example, there's a lot of data showing that there's inadequate comprehensive genomic profiling of cancers, particularly non-small cell, where that could give better information. We had done, before I left Point 32, a deal with Foundation Medicine that's intended to actually help steer toward the right medications and more into clinical trials where, by the way, payers don't pay for. So this whole fragmented system makes it really hard. I think that there are opportunities, but they require, first of all, stronger partnerships with the providers, and then you need, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but you also need some tools and some ability to make sure that you're not accused of doing evil. And we talk about that a lot at RA. If you're doing a value-based agreement, again, in musculoskeletal, it's pretty clear what's appropriate and what isn't. If someone wants something that their oncologist isn't providing, which, again, they may have read something online about something which has no data associated, they're going to go to the press and scream loudly. And how do you actually have certain tools and rules of engagement to prevent that from blowing up the agreement? So I think there's a lot we can do, but for oncology, again, exciting as an investment thesis, but really hard to do.
No, great insights. Value in oncology, a little more complicated than other conditions like musculoskeletal. How we may define the value of different outcomes may be different, and then it is a fragmented space. Rasu, maybe from your perspective, as a health system, when you think about value, I'm curious your perspective around value-based care. How are you guys thinking about oncology?
Yeah, value at the end of the day really is about quality over cost, right? So when you think about oncology in particular, the outcomes, the patient experience, very different and very difficult also to measure compared to the rest of the healthcare ecosystem over the direct and indirect costs. And there are so many different elements that go into the complexity of these really complex oncology patients that we're dealing with across the board. And when we think about the depth and breadth of Advocate Health, with over 13,000 participating physicians, with 12 ACOs and CINs, with 2.3 million managed lives and over 73 participating hospitals. That's a lot to decipher, right, in terms of looking at value-based care and population health. So at the end of the day, the way that we're really looking at this is a number of different things. One is, how do we really bring together the right clinical enablement support? How do we use the right tools in education and care management, pharmacy, workflow support to really improve these outcomes and manage the medical expenses and closing in on those care gaps? Second is really around value-based care performance. Well, we think that's really important, right? So utilization management and cost containment initiatives to really manage financial risk and population health management, contracting, financial modeling. And then care delivery and transformation, thirdly, is really critical as well. So as we think about even the growth scale and influence that I mentioned earlier, that care delivery and transformation element continues to factor into how we continue to innovate around oncology, how we continue to really look at the value network and community resource curation, which we think is really critical. And then last but not least, which I think is really fundamental and foundation to everything that we're talking about today, really is technology, data, and analytics, right? So really looking at technology and the tools to engage our patients in oncology and beyond across the care continuum to improve those outcomes, prioritize the high-cost patients, and then really manage coding and care gap opportunities, and then work with the payers in the right construct. You mentioned, Dan, earlier, my prior experience, 12 years at UPMC, a payer provider organization, and now at Advocate Health, a different sort of an organization with very tight relationships, given the growth that we've enjoyed in the last several years with payers, but also, as I mentioned earlier, very deep into value-based care and population health across CINs and our Pop Health network. Really important to have that strong technology, data, analytics backbone to enable everything I just talked about.
Rasu, I think you just prefaced my next question, which is going to be the last question, and you hit on it. What are the opportunities for early stage healthcare technology companies? And I heard you talk about provider engagement, performance measurement and management, contracting, care transformation, and then kind of population stratification with the use of technology. Would you agree with those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when I think about that, you mentioned the cancer moonshot earlier, really fortunate to be on the steering committee there as one of the founding health system in the steering committees. But when you think about the burden that we have, not just at Advocate Health, but really nationally and internationally, the embrace to reduce the deaths from cancer by 50%, improve the experience of people and their families living with and supporting cancer, and making sure that we're able to really move the needle in a sizable way as a collaborative, right? So not just us at Advocate Health, but really across all of the different participants that we have in the webinar today. I would throw that out as another big challenge in addition to everything that you just summarized there, Dan.
This has been such a great conversation. Unfortunately, we have to cut it short. Thank you so much, Rasu. Thank you, Michael. I'll invite my colleague, JG, to introduce the next panel. JG.
So much, Dan, and wonderful conversation. I think a great lead into what we're going to discuss now on the care management side. And as our folks are getting here, Hill, Rick, and Adam, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you all so much for joining us. I think just to start here, it'd be helpful for our audience just to hear a bit about you and then also the companies that you guys are leading. So maybe you could provide a brief background. Hill, let's start with you.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Hill. I am the co-founder and CEO at VivorCare, where we are building a new comprehensive care model for cancer survivorship care. So you can think of us as solving one fundamental problem, which is that we have spent a very long time in healthcare laser focused on finding a cure for cancer, and we have spent a whole lot less time thinking about what happens when folks actually survive. And surviving cancer is an incredible gift. It also comes with a slew of what we call these short and late effects of cancer. These are the physical and mental toxicities that stem from cancer treatment. And so at Vivor, we have a transitional care model that is developed to actually off-ramp folks from cancer care into the long-term management phase. This is a personal passion project for me. Around 5 years ago now, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, ended up pivoting my career from consulting into cancer care innovation, and a chance to work with some incredible folks, including Rick here. So it's fun to be on the same panel together. But was psyched to kind of launch and start building in survivorship.
Wonderful. Excited to dive into more of the evolution of the survivorship services that you guys are providing. Rick, maybe pass it over to you.
Yeah, nice lead in, Hill. Thank you. Great seeing you again as well. Rick Dean, CEO at OncoHealth, Atlanta-based company. We're about a decade-old company. Primarily work with payers. So we have about 20 payers that we work with. That represents about 10 million members across those payers. Various oncology solutions from, on the one hand, utilization management to trying to make sure that patients are getting the right drugs. That's very complicated. Lots of drugs in the marketplace, as you guys probably already know. Hard for payers to keep up with all of that on an ongoing basis. We have staffs of medical oncologists, hematologists, radiation oncologists, oncology nurses, oncology PharmDs, just a big clinical staff that come from all the great places in the country. We also handle data analytics for payers as well, based off that oncology data, all the way down to virtual care management. And the background with me has really been 25 years in healthcare, mainly been in smaller venture capital-backed companies that we have grown and scaled, and had an opportunity to work with Flair at a previous company when I was at Humedica. And so that was fantastic. And then growing those companies up, and then all the way over to launching Optum's venture capital business in 2016, which is now Optum Ventures.
Awesome. Yeah, would love to. And we'll dig into just the venture scale and thinking about oncology. Excited, and thanks, Rick. Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great discussion dialogue so far. Adam Pellegrini, CEO, co-founder of Jasper Health, launched about 2.5, 3 years ago, really focused on that quintessential problem of when you hear those words, you have cancer, what is the next step? Very patient first, very patient and caregiver first centric digital solution. Jasper really focuses on holistic care, so that 360-degree psychosocial support and coaching and cancer navigation. Our primary audience is working through payers and employers, and a really big relationship with Memorial Sloan Kettering, for example. So really powerful sort of stories coming from our members.
Yeah, great. And in our short time here, we'll try to cover as much ground as we can. I want to dig right into it. We heard a lot of the theme and the thread from Dan and Michael and Razu around value and defining value in the context of systems and payers. I want to talk about demonstrating value at different stages of the customer relationship as you guys enter these markets. Maybe starting with Adam and Hill. Jasper, VivorCare, both working with both clinics as well as employers to provide tools that are helping improve gaps in care and wraparound services, critical gaps that maybe weren't there or reimbursed previously, in many ways helping transition in the shift from fee-for-service to value. Adam, maybe can you start by sharing some of your perspectives on how you're organizing within the employers and how you're demonstrating value across the different stages of those customer journeys?
Yeah, I think employers are really looking for how do we control costs year one, and how do we, things like ED deflection. That's a clear area where we can help and triage. I think also the psychosocial financial toxicity, copay assistance, those are things that hit everyone. Health plans are looking at providing more deeper oncology solution to employers, and employers are looking to provide more support. So we think engagement, driving down costs, those type of things are what employers are looking for.
Absolutely. And Hill, VivorCare and y'all are embedding within clinics to provide support for both patients as well as staff providers. How are you all seeing and demonstrating that value across your stakeholders and those partners?
Yeah, so we are partnering with value-based oncology groups. And so when we sit down with our provider partners and we talk about value-based care in cancer, really we're talking about kind of two core buckets here. So one is the unmet needs in this population and how addressing them can drive to higher value care. And the second is actually around the workforce and how we optimize the workforce for value. And so in the first bucket, it's exactly what Adam mentioned. The research has shown time and again that unmet needs in this population, things like psychosocial distress, side effect management, social determinants of health, if they are left unaddressed, they drive higher rates of hospitalization, emergency use, overutilization of the oncology team, right? So we want to be really rigorously tracking those outcomes. At the same time, what a lot of oncology practices are thinking about now is really this burgeoning problem in the workforce, right? So if we think about cancer as a pipeline, the cancer population on both sides, we essentially have a growing population of folks getting cancer and a growing population of folks surviving cancer, with the oncology workforce really bearing the brunt of that. Right? And so the question becomes, can we actually implement new models alongside these value-based oncology groups to reduce some of that over-reliance on the oncologist, free them up to practice at the top of their license, and think about how we really deliver care-based high-value models for cancer?
Absolutely. And Adam, you talked about getting to the patient, lowering those costs immediately. Hill, you're talking about some of the care delivery aspects and managing overburdened staff, clinical resources that are with some of those systems, payers, clinics, or providers and clinics. Rick, would love your input in demonstrating this value on the payer perspective. Given OncoHealth is selling directly to payers, their ASO employers, can you speak to how these payers are adopting digital solutions in cancer?
Yeah, I think on a payer level, Payers look at spend, they look at trend. And over the past 5-10 years, cancer trend and spend has been increasing. It's not only for the payer, it's for the employer. That's for all of us as consumers. And that's mainly due to skyrocketing cancer drug costs. That's what's really driving a lot of that. I think what you have seen in the payer market started really in the employer market with a lot of the digital solutions that have been in market for 5-10 years or so, Livongo, Omada, and so forth, that have been really successful in pushing into that market. It's hard to build scale sometimes when you're into that market and you need to cross over. And I think both those guys did that really well in crossing over to the payer side of the point that's taking the risk. So we focused on that. And when we think about adoption today, we're seeing adoption across Medicare Advantage lives, we're seeing it across commercial lives, and we're signing a deal hopefully in the next couple of days around all three that has Medicaid, commercial, and MA. But what I'm finding actually is that it's the product teams that are in the payers that are actually starting to dig into these solutions, like what Adam has and what Hill has and what we have. And there's other companies out there, and that's great. I think having everybody out here talking about these things are great. It's helping the adoption. But I think on the payer side, employers have pushed some of that. They're spending pretty good amount of money on ASO premiums on a monthly basis to the payer. And you get companies walking into an employer saying, we've got this really wonderful solution that can help your employees out. And the employer looks at the payer and says, hey, man, I'm paying you a bunch of money. Why don't you bring me these solutions? And so we've taken the approach of, we have a bunch of payers. We're going to dig into that market, work with those product teams, and allow them to bring those solutions to market so that they can take it to the employer group and also their fully commercial book of business and their MA and their Medicaid shops. But that's the adoption, John, that we're seeing. It's now 2 years ago, you didn't see a lot about ancillary oncology solutions in the marketplace. And now you're seeing RFPs that are being issued by payers left and right for these solutions. And I think that's a trend that I anticipate will probably continue. Payers are generally, especially regional payers, quite slow to adopt things, and they wait for a couple of nationals to do something, then they jump in, and we're starting to see that.
Yeah, really insightful. We're bumping up just on time here. We've got less than a minute and certainly more topics we wanted to cover here. Maybe just with a last thought and closing part before I transition over to Ian. As we think about business models and reimbursement, as you all have looked back at 2023 and now looking ahead to 2024 with your business models, how reimbursement and regulatory has impacted how you are receiving payments for services and what you guys are providing and seeing those unlocks. As we think about regulatory changes, what headwinds or tailwinds are we facing, and what shifts in policy do you foresee or think would enable just a bit more of that innovation as we think about the unlocks that we've made thus far?
On the payer side, payers need to see really one thing, two maybe. ROI is the biggest one. If there's no ROI, there's no kind of future. And then secondarily, they're trying to help their members. And the headwinds are, how do they find ROI in solutions around ED visits, hospitalizations, end of life spend? And you've got to be able to get in and be able to actually move patients from place to place, give medical advice, be able to do things like that in order to do that. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think at a high level too, obviously one headwind that I think Dr. Sherman just addressed in the previous session was cancer is really hard and it's very costly. It is going to take creative solutions for us to actually implement these new models. I think in terms of tailwinds, we are seeing a lot. I think many of us on this call were excited to see the new proposed CMS fee schedule for 24 reimbursing for principal illness navigation and cancer. We have the Cancer Survivorship Act on the floor in Congress, thinking about alternative payment models. OCM, EOM, the momentum is there. So it's exciting to see where it's going to go.
Great. And absolutely, that's exactly what I was. And using AI to scale, that's what we've really focused on. This idea that you can scale with humans, provide empathy at scale. That's going to help us with cancer navigation and really driving new business models. We can do clinical trials now matching in 8 seconds with AI on Jasper. Those are the type of things we want to see.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we're just at time. This was a wonderful discussion. Rick, Adam, Hill, really appreciate you all joining us here today and look forward to continuing to see and follow your progress with OncoHealth, Jasper, and VivorCare. With that, I will pass it along to my partner, Ian Chiang, to discuss digital health and the life sciences with Alice and Melissa. Thank you all again. And Ian, over to you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, AG. Thanks so much, AG. While we're waiting for Melissa and Alice to join, there we go. So really, it's truly a privilege for me to be able to moderate a panel of two really good friends, and Alice and I even serve on the same board together. Given that we are short on time, maybe I'll jump straight into the discussion. Melissa, maybe given that there are so many exciting news coming out of advancement of oncology, and Suni this morning just mentioned that about some large industry news, you've been on the forefront of the oncology evolutions, and you were part of Flatiron Health and saw the importance of digital health's role throughout the years in advancing research. Can you talk about some of your experience and share with our audience how do you see digital health's role in advancing oncology research?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Flatiron was really on the leading edge of this new wave of companies that was focused on learning from the experience of patients in the real world. We all know the statistics, only 4% of patients, cancer patients actually make it into a clinical trial. And for that period, they're studied very deeply and their data is really well followed. But most patients actually live their lives in the routine care setting. And there's a tremendous amount of information you can learn there as well. And so the key insight for Flatiron was really that there was value in this kind of data exhaust. In our case, we had an oncology EHR, and this information was trapped in silos and it wasn't refined into usable end products. That technology really allowed us to go build these pipes and get the raw data out and then turn it into this new type of data that was interoperable.
That's great. Thank you, Melissa. And maybe Alice, let me transition to you. You're in such a privileged position to help fund companies that dedicate themselves to defeating cancer and advance health equity. Could you share with us some of the most glaring unmet needs in oncology research and how digital health companies can help address those unmet needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ian, it's great to be here. I learned a lot in just the first part of this webinar. For those who aren't familiar, American Cancer Society is the country's largest nonprofit. We are the largest non-governmental funder of cancer research, so we have the granting trend insights. We're also in 5,000 communities providing safety net services, so free lodging, free rides, the call center, as well as publish the public health guidelines. And then on top of that, we're advocating in 50 state capitals, Washington, D.C. And the society still exists today because the burden of cancer is unacceptably high. I would argue that the distribution of that burden is also disproportionate and unfair, and that's unacceptable. And when you look at the current innovation trajectories, we're actually innovating away from health equity with a tremendous focus that remains on precision oncology discovery-led opportunities. And so the unmet need is really great. And I think that digital health has a tremendous opportunity to deliver outcomes, just as Melissa had said, from what we see in the clinic to what we see in the community, but also to really attack the disparities that we know persist, as well as democratize innovation and investing. And so that can be in the fact that we still have 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women are going to receive the diagnosis. The number of cancer patients remains high. The types of cancers that continue to be neglected by the marketplace, that needs to be addressed. And definitely the underserved, whether it's because of their geography, their social economic status, their race, you name it, we need to find ways to essentially secure access, drive adherence and affordability. And so I think that digital health can bring the outside in to those innovators and also inform investors of downstream risks and opportunities so that we can really design for the outcomes that we're all talking about that need to take place.
Thank you so much, Alice. Maybe let us switch gear a little bit. I know Adam mentioned about the importance of AI, and it will be remiss almost any panel nowadays not to talk about generative AI. Melissa, given that you've been a product leader all throughout your career, like just how transformative is generative AI in your mind?
So I think it has the potential to be incredibly transformative, but it's really around how and where it gets deployed, right? We're an industry that still has a heavy reliance on the fax machine. Like by and large, we're not a crop of early adopters, and it is not because the technology isn't there. And so I think we really need to think about the incentives and the workflow and how, what are the right use cases to apply AI? And those are the places, obviously, where there's huge markets with clear ROI, but also very low risk of patient harm. Where are there places where there are humans in the loop that we can actually make 10x as efficient while making sure that we still have those safeguards in place and the appropriate ways to ensure that we're not harming patients, and thinking about the headlines that might come from that, as well as obviously the impact on patient outcomes. So I'm really interested in places where we can plug into existing workflows and either do something we haven't done before or make people a lot more efficient. So as an example, prior to Verily, I was working in building AI to automate medical coding. I think this is a place, RCM in general, where there's a lot of manual effort and there are tasks that can be done more efficiently while still keeping the human, whether it's an auditor or a coder, in the loop. I think there's a lot of potential around, for example, multimodal data and how we curate and analyze that data, use that to then surface relevant insights at relevant time points. The recruitment use case that Sunit was talking about, how we triage patients, how we start to populate some of their data into clinical trials. This is one of the problem spaces we're thinking about at Verily, and I think really how we apply and automate some of the steps around clinical trials, I think is also a huge potential. And then finally, patient engagement, where I see a lot of potential around voice bots, chat bots, ways to actually reach out to patients, create curated content for them, really keep them engaged in their care, give them a point of contact to be able to surface and share their patient experience. I think these are all places where I'd love to see generative AI continue to innovate.
That's great. And Alice, you invest in so many of these companies, and what's the overall ACS take and your take? And do you share a similar level of enthusiasm as Melissa described?
Yeah. I would say, I think we can all agree that it's still pretty early stages. And so when you think of a traditional product development touch point with ACS, it starts on the granting side. And so I actually was surprised to learn myself that we are currently granting in the AI space. It's mostly through the survivorship bucket. And so thinking about new models of delivering care, really aligning incentives, some of the risk reduction models and tools that we can deploy. I think in the portfolio, when we look at our mission thematic areas, and BrightEdge invests across the entire cancer care continuum. So we are just as passionate about prevention, wellness, early detection, screening, as we are in precision oncology, targeted therapeutics, as well as survivorhood. And so I'm really delighted that many of our companies now do claim AI to be part of their proprietary product development pathway, whether it's a paradigm that's in clinical trial matching, whether it's a Lunit AI that has AI-enabled radiology pathology that will help patients in low resource settings and in more rural settings access high quality screening. But we also are seeing AI-enabled algorithms in some of our liquid biopsy companies that are using multiomics. And then lastly, in the navigation space, we have one company that really illustrates our kind of quadruple bottom line, because keep in mind, as the provider of many of these patient services, we're also not concessionary in our investing. We're trying to grow an alternative revenue stream to fund and fuel the nonprofit operations, while also deliver mission through more entrepreneurial ways. And so TaylorMed has a financial navigation software platform that allows, through AI, matching of programs and also enrollment and eligibility. So we're very excited about this space, but I would say it's still quite early.
Got it. Alice and Melissa, I know we're quickly coming up on time, so maybe with the last few minutes, can you, given today's macro market environment, selling to biopharma is becoming harder and harder. Maybe Melissa, can you talk a little bit about what would be your recommendation to many of the attendees of building companies selling to the biopharma? How would you advise them navigate today's macro market environment?
Yeah, look, I definitely feel a change from 10 years ago. I think it's a higher bar. Companies are less willing to invest in longer term strategic bets and are really thinking about the problems and pain points that they're wrestling with today. But that said, I think best companies are started in a tougher economic environment, and it shortens the feedback cycle and really tells you if you have something that people are willing to pay for. So my advice is go find a budget holder who's willing to write you a check, no matter how small it is, and really use that to learn and take the feedback and think about what can you build that actually scales to other customers as well. And I think really innovate together with your partners.
Thank you, Melissa. Maybe Alice, I'll let you close. And what's your advice for startups that are selling to companies and also looking to partner with ACS?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that all the things Melissa described, but really putting that impact lens. So we need to be focused on outcomes, not just outputs. We need to be thinking about where along the value chain we can actually deliver more rational and ethical product design and decision making. And part of that is bringing the insights and the analytics to those decision makers at the most critical points in drug development or other product development. And so I think that really having the ultimate end goal in mind and then being very succinct and clear about your value proposition to your different customer sets.
So thank you so much, Alice and Melissa, and really appreciate you for jumping on this panel. I know we can go on for an hour, but I need to hand it back to JG. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks all. As our panelists are dropping, let me conclude this session by thanking each of our guests for their time and really insightful perspectives here. We've covered a lot of grounds. Obviously, there is a lot more to talk about. So as always, please reach out if you would like to continue the conversation. We look forward to seeing you for our next session. Thanks again for joining, everyone.